The bounty on Princess Isabel's head was enough to buy a star system, but the syndicate forgot one crucial detail. They didn't just have to breach the royal palace. They had to go through Corporal Declan Hayes. And Declan only had one rule. Absolutely nobody gets within 10 feet. The grand ballroom of the new Geneva diplomatic station was a swirling sea of silk, bioluminescence, and political treachery. Chandeliers carved from raw asteroid crystal cast a cold, fractured light over the elite of 36 star systems. At the center of it all stood Princess Isabel. Her species, the Illyrians, possessed a striking ethereal beauty that mirrored human features almost exactly, save for the faint shimmering scales that caught the light along their cheekbones, and the terrifyingly sharp intellect behind their violet eyes. Isabel was the sole surviving heir to a coalition that controlled the most lucrative hyperlanes in the sector. That made her the most important person in the room. It also made her a walking target. Standing exactly 3 paces behind her was Declan Hayes. Declan did not wear ceremonial armor. He did not carry a decorative energy pike. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that hid the rigid plates of his subcutaneous body armor, and his weapon of choice was a heavy kinetic slug sidearm strapped tightly in a shoulder holster. He was a human, a species relatively new to the interstellar stage, largely dismissed by the older races as primitive and overly aggressive. But when the Illyrian royal family needed someone to keep their last air breathing, they didn't hire a highborn alien Templar. They hired a veteran of the Earth Defense Forces. "You are radiating tension, Corporal," Isabel murmured, her voice carrying a melodic cadence. Though she didn't turn her head, she smiled graciously at a passing dignitary. "It is a peace gala. You are making the ambassadors nervous." "With all due respect, Your Highness, making them nervous is my job," Declan replied, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that barely carried over the ambient string music. His eyes, a pale icy blue, scanned the crowd with mechanical precision. "My job is keeping you alive. Peace galas are just assassinations waiting for an excuse. You humans and your paranoia. Paranoia is what kept my ancestors alive in the mud, ma'am. Now it keeps you alive on marble." Declan's gaze locked onto a figure detaching from the main cluster of diplomats. It was Ambassador Sullivan, a high-ranking envoy from the Outer Rim territories. Sullivan was smiling, holding a flute of sparkling blue liquid, moving with a calculated slowness toward the princess. There was nothing overtly threatening about him, but Declan's internal alarms immediately began screaming. It was the eyes. Sullivan's eyes weren't tracking the princess's face. They were tracking her neck. Furthermore, the ambassador's right hand was entirely too stiff against his side, his thumb resting near the cuff of his velvet jacket. "We have a walker at your 10 o'clock, Declan said softly, shifting his weight. "Do not engage." "It is only Sullivan," Isabel whispered back, though she smoothly adjusted her posture. "He is an old ally of my father." "Was?" Declan corrected. As Sullivan crossed the invisible 10-foot perimeter that Declan had mentally drawn around the princess, the human moved. It wasn't a graceful, flowing movement like the Illyrians were known for. It was an explosion of kinetic energy. Before Sullivan could raise his hand, before the princess could gasp, Declan closed the distance. The human's left hand shot out, clamping around Sullivan's right wrist with the crushing force of a hydraulic press. A sickening crack echoed over the gentle hum of the orchestra as bone gave way. Sullivan let out a choked gasp, dropping a concealed micro-emitter, a close-range neural disruptor designed to look like a simple cufflink. In the same fluid motion, Declan stepped into Sullivan's guard, driving his right shoulder into the ambassador's chest. The impact lifted the... "Of course they are," Declan snarled, pulling the princess around a corner and moving toward the service elevators. "What's our alternate?" "Sector 4 safe house. It's off the grid. Reinforced. I've got a transport waiting in the lower maintenance bay." "But Declan, chatter is spiking. The Whisperers are in play." Declan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The Whisperers weren't just mercenaries. They were a corporate-funded wetwork team known for leaving 0 survivors. "Understood. We're going to ground." Declan looked back at Isabel. Her usual royal composure was cracking, replaced by a very real, very human-looking fear. "Corporal," she breathed, her violet eyes wide. "They will not stop." "Neither will I," Declan said, racking the slide of his pistol. "Let them come." The transport was a heavy, unmarked cargo hauler that smelled of ozone and recycled oil. It rattled violently as it descended through the atmospheric strata of New Geneva's lower industrial sectors. The endless rain of the colony drummed against the reinforced hull, a sound that usually brought Declan comfort, reminding him of home on Earth. Tonight, however, it just sounded like a countdown. Princess Isabel sat across from him on a metal jump seat. The bioluminescence of her skin faded to a pale, terrified glow. She clutched a heavy thermal blanket around her shoulders. "You broke his wrist in 3 places," she said quietly, breaking the heavy silence of the cargo hold. "I saw the medical scan as we left the station. The doctor said a human hand should not be capable of generating that much focus torque." Declan was busy checking the spare magazines on his tactical rig. "Humans evolved on a planet that actively tried to kill us every day. High gravity, apex predators, extreme weather. Our bone density and muscle fibers are built for one thing: survival. Your people evolved in a utopia. It makes you elegant, but it makes you fragile. Is that why you were chosen for this? Because you are a brute." "I was chosen because I don't care about your politics," Declan replied, slamming a fresh magazine home. "I care about the perimeter. Sullivan breached the perimeter. It's a simple binary equation. He got too close. So he got put down." The transport jolted heavily, the landing gear locking into place. The hiss of depressurization signaled their arrival at Sector 4. It was the underbelly of the city, a forgotten maze of abandoned hydroprocessing plants and smuggler dens. The safe house was an old maintenance bunker, buried beneath 50 feet of reinforced concrete and lead shielding. Declan led the way out into the stinging, acidic rain, his eyes scanning the shadows. The alleyway was dead quiet, save for the rhythmic dripping of water from rusted pipes. He guided Isabel quickly through a heavy blast door, engaging the mechanical locks behind them. The bunker was Spartan, a single large room with a cot, a bank of outdated monitors, and a reinforced choke point at the entrance. Arthur had stocked it well. There were trauma kits, ration bars, and a heavy plasma rifle leaning against the wall. "We stay here until extraction arrives in 12 hours, Declan instructed, tossing his damp jacket onto a chair. "Do not stand near the door. Do not stand near the ventilation grates. Sit on the floor behind the concrete stanchion." Isabel obeyed, sliding down the rough concrete wall. She looked remarkably small, stripped of her royal court and her bodyguards. "Corporal, why do you do this? The Illyrian treasury is paying you, yes, but no amount of credits is worth facing the whispers." Genetically augmented, they felt no pain. Declan walked over to a heavy metal crate and began pulling out proximity mines. "I don't need them to feel pain, Princess. I just need them to bleed. As for why I do it, loyalty. Your father saved my platoon during the Orion skirmish 5 years ago. He sent Illyrian medical ships when Earth Command wrote us off as a lost cause. I owe your bloodline." He began planting the mines along the narrow corridor leading to the main blast door. "I pay my debts." Suddenly, the dim overhead lights flickered. The low hum of the bunker's independent generator whined, sputtered, and died. Plunged into absolute darkness, Isabel let out a sharp gasp. "Silence, Declan." Someone was breaching the outer access hatch. "Arthur," Declan whispered into his comms. Static hissed back at him. They were jamming all frequencies. "They're here," Isabel whispered, her voice trembling. Declan's night vision optics whined to life, painting the pitch-black room in stark monochromatic green. He could see the dust falling from the ceiling as heavy, deliberate footsteps moved down the concrete stairs outside. "Stay low. Cover your ears," Declan ordered, picking up the heavy plasma rifle and taking position behind a steel barricade facing the door. The whispers didn't bother knocking. A shaped charge detonated against the main blast door, the explosion rocking the bunker and sending a shockwave that rattled Declan's teeth. The heavy steel door blew inward, groaning off its hinges and slamming into the floor in a cloud of thick, choking smoke. Through the dust, four towering silhouettes stepped into the breach. They wore sleek matte black armor that absorbed the minimal ambient light, their visors glowing with a sinister red hue. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision, the hallmark of Commander Pierce's elite strike team. They expected easy prey. They expected a terrified diplomat and a single outgunned guard. They didn't realize they had just stepped into a human's kill box. Declan didn't wait for them to scan the room. He slammed his hand down on the detonator for the proximity mines he had rigged to the doorframe. The ensuing explosion was deafening. The narrow corridor funneled the blast outward, catching the lead two Whispers directly in the chest. Shrapnel tore through their advanced armor, sending them flying backward into the stairwell. Before the smoke could even clear, Declan opened fire. The plasma rifle roared, sending searing bolts of superheated energy down the corridor. He didn't fire wildly. His aim was cold, calculated, and ruthlessly efficient. He aimed for the joints, the neck seals, the gaps in their high-tech plating. Target acquired. One of the surviving Whispers barked, raising a heavy pulse cannon. A barrage of kinetic rounds tore through Declan's barricade, sparking off the steel and showering him with fragments. He ducked low, feeling a grazing shot sear across his left bicep. The pain was immediate, sharp, and hot, but Declan welcomed it. It triggered the oldest, most dangerous mechanism in the human body. Adrenaline flooded his system. Time seemed to slow down. His heart hammered in his chest, pumping oxygen-rich blood to his muscles. Dropping the depleted plasma rifle, Declan drew his heavy kinetic sidearm. The Illyrians relied on energy weapons, clean, precise, elegant. Humans still used heavy slugs of lead and tungsten because they knew that sometimes you just needed to hit something incredibly hard. Declan broke from cover, moving with a speed that defied his heavy build. He closed the distance to the remaining assassins, sliding under a burst of pulse fire, and brought his weapon up. At this range, the 10-foot rule was in full effect. He fired 3 times. The thunderous roar of the human firearm echoed brutally in the confined space. The thunderous roar of the human firearm echoed brutally in the confined space. Declan's first shot struck the lead Whisperer perfectly in the center of mass. The heavy tungsten cord slug shattered the advanced ceramic plating that covered the assassin's chest. The impact carried so much kinetic force that it lifted the heavy operative off his feet. The second and third shots found the compromised armor, punching through the mechanical undersuit and disabling the combatant instantly. Long rifle and closed the distance with terrifying, unnatural speed. The enemy's servos whined a high-pitched mechanical shriek reminiscent of ancient Boston Dynamics military prototypes as they lunged, driving a heavily armored shoulder directly into Declan's chest. The impact felt like being hit by a freight train. Declan was thrown backward, crashing through the bank of outdated monitoring equipment in a shower of glass and electrical sparks. His heavy pistol clattered across the concrete floor, spinning out of reach. The Whisperer stood over him, drawing a serrated monomolecular combat blade. The visor glowed a hateful red in the dim light. "You fight well for a primate," the Whisperer synthesized through an external speaker, the voice devoid of all emotion. "But meat always yields to metal." Declan tasted copper. His ribs screamed in protest as he forced himself up onto one knee. "You talk too much for a professional," he rasped. As the assassin drove the blade downward, Declan didn't block. Blocking a machine-driven strike would have shattered his forearm. Instead, he twisted violently to the left, allowing the blade to bury itself deep into the concrete floor where his chest had been a fraction of a second before. Before the assassin could yank the blade free, Declan surged forward, wrapping his thick arms around the enemy's armored knee joint. He dug his heels into the floor and torqued his entire body. It was a wrestling technique passed down through generations of human combat, relying on leverage rather than brute strength. The Whisperer's mechanical joint popped, the structural integrity failing under the sudden lateral pressure. The assassin collapsed with a digitized grunt of surprise. Declan didn't hesitate. He scrambled upward, drawing the heavy K-bar combat knife strapped to his thigh, a reliable, high-carbon steel design that had served human soldiers for centuries. He drove the hilt of the knife into the seal of the assassin's helmet, using all of his body weight to snap the locking mechanism. The helmet hissed and popped loose. Declan ripped the helmet away, raising his knife for a finishing strike. Then he froze. The face beneath the visor wasn't a genetically modified alien clone. It wasn't an Illyrian extremist. It was human. The man had tactical bioports grafted to his temples and synthetic optics replacing his left eye, but the facial structure, the sweat, the gritted teeth, it was undeniably human. "Who is paying you?" Declan demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He pressed the edge of the blade against the traitor's throat. The cyborg spat a wad of crimson saliva at Declan's boot. "You think you're saving her, Hayes? You're just delaying the inevitable." The contract didn't come from the syndicate. It came from the top. Before Declan could interrogate him further, the cyborg's synthetic eye flared a brilliant, blinding white. Declan instantly recognized the neural overload sequence of a suicide failsafe. He threw himself backward just as the mercenaries' cranial implants short-circuited in a violent, localized thermal flash, leaving the assassin lifeless on the floor. Silence descended on the ruined bunker, broken only by the crackle of damaged electronics and the heavy, ragged breathing of the surviving human. "Corporal!" Isabel's voice cut through the haze. She scrambled out from behind the concrete stanchion, her royal dress torn and stained with ash. She fell to her knees beside him, her violet eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "You are injured. Your arm." Declan glanced down. The grazing plasma shot had burned through his jacket and seared the muscle of his left bicep. The pain was a dull, throbbing ache that was slowly beginning to sharpen as the adrenaline receded. "It's cauterized," Declan said gruffly, pushing himself up to a seated position. He waved her away as she reached out with trembling hands. "Don't touch it. I said keep your distance, Your Highness." "Do not be absurd," Isabel snapped, a flash of her aristocratic authority breaking through the fear. She grabbed a small medical stapler from the scattered trauma kit on the floor. "I am terrified, yes, but I am not useless. Hold still." Declan watched in mild surprise as the elegant, sheltered princess efficiently clamped the synthetic biomesh over his burn, sealing it with a series of sharp clicks. "I know you are frightened," Declan said, his tone softening just a fraction. He looked her directly in the eyes. "You have every right to be. The people you trusted are dead." And Isabel took a shuddering breath, staring at the ruined bodies of the Whisperers. "He was human. Your own kind was sent to kill me." "Mercenaries don't have a species," Declan replied coldly, retrieving his pistol and checking the action. "They have a price tag, but what he said before he burned out, that changes things. If the contract didn't come from the syndicate, it means the Illyrian High Council is compromised." "My uncle," Isabel whispered, the realization draining the remaining bioluminescent color from her cheeks. "Counselor Preston. He handles the royal security budget. He would have the clearance to hire a Tier 1 strike team and bypass station security, which means we can't trust the extraction Arthur set up," Declan muttered, pulling himself fully to his feet. He walked over to a heavy storage locker in the corner of the room, pulling out 2 heavy weather-resistant cloaks. He tossed one to the princess. "Put that on. Hide your face. We are leaving." "Where are we going?" Isabel asked, wrapping the heavy canvas around her shoulders. "To the surface," Declan said, his pale blue eyes hardening into something resembling chipped ice. "We are going to steal a ship." The industrial sector above the bunker was a graveyard of abandoned manufacturing plants and rusted pipelines. The torrential acidic rain hammered down, washing away the smog, but leaving a bitter chemical taste in the air. Declan led Isabel through the maze of towering cooling towers, moving with silent predatory caution. His eyes constantly scanned the rooftops and narrow alleyways. They needed transport and fast. They found it idling near an automated cargo depot, a heavy 6-wheeled transport hauler powered by a Caterpillar fusion drive engine. It was an ugly, utilitarian beast of a machine designed for hauling raw or from the planetary mines. It was exactly what they needed. Declan forced the electronic lock on the driver's side with a multi-tool, sliding into the worn leather seat. Isabel climbed in the passenger side, shivering as the damp cold of the rain seeped into the cabin. Declan hot-wired the ignition, and the massive fusion engine roared to life with a deep, vibrating hum that shook the chassis. "Hold on," Declan warned, slamming the heavy gearshift forward. The transport lunged out of the depot, its massive tires tearing through the flooded streets. Just as they hit the main transit artery, Declan's earpiece finally crackled back to life. The static cleared, revealing the panicked voice of his overwatch. Declan, do you copy?" The jamming field dropped. Arthur's voice was frantic. "I saw the bunker breach on the structural sensors. Tell me you're alive." Declan kept one hand on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the rain-slicked road. "We're clear, Arthur, but the safe house is burned. For whisperers, one was a human augmerk. He talked before he expired." "Thank God," Arthur breathed. "Listen, I have a backup extraction protocol. I've secured a private orbital shuttle at Sector 7, landing pad 9. It's an old Boeing commercial freighter, completely off the Royal Registry. If you can get there in 20 minutes, I can remotely override the launch sequence." Isabel looked at Declan, hope finally breaking through her exhaustion. But Declan's grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles turned white. His mind raced, calculating variables with cold precision. "Sector 7, Declan repeated slowly. "Arthur, what is the weather like at your position in the Overwatch Tower?" "What?" "It's pouring, Declan. Same as you. Just get to the pad. It's a clear shot down the main expressway." Declan reached up and severed the comms link, plunging the cabin back into the steady drone of the heavy engine and the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers. "Why did you do that?" Isabel demanded, her voice rising in panic. "He has a ship. Arthur's tower is above the cloud layer, Your Highness," Declan said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He swung the massive transport off the main expressway, taking a sharp turn down a narrow, unlit maintenance road. "It isn't raining at his position, and he told us to take the main expressway. If the council's compromised, they have eyes on all main arteries. He's leading us into a kill zone." Isabel stared at him, the reality of the betrayal sinking in. "Your own Overwatch? Everyone has a price," Declan replied, pushing the accelerator to the floor. "We aren't going to Sector 7. We are going to the automated aerospace elevator in Sector 12. It's a localized freight launcher. It won't be comfortable and it won't be safe, but it's the only asset they won't be watching." The transport tore through the desolate outskirts of the city, leaving a massive plume of displaced water in its wake. 10 minutes later, the towering structure of the Boeing aerospace elevator loomed out of the fog. It was a massive skeletal tower that reached up into the low-orbit atmosphere, designed to launch raw materials to the orbital refineries via high-speed magnetic rails. Declan skidded the transport to a halt near the base of the tower. The area was eerily quiet. A single heavy freight pod sat locked in the launch cradle, its bay doors open. "Move," Declan ordered, grabbing his rifle and ushering the princess out into the rain. They sprinted across the cracked permacrete of the loading bay. They were less than 50 yards from the pod when the floodlights surrounding the launch pad suddenly flared to life, blinding them in a harsh artificial glare. "That's far enough, Corporal," the voice echoed from a public address system. From behind the shipping containers, heavily armed operatives stepped into the light. They weren't wearing mercenary black. They wore the silver and crimson armor of the Illyrian Royal Guard. Stepping to the front of the formation was a towering human in heavy tactical gear. Commander Briggs, the personal head of security for Councillor Preston. Briggs held a heavy particle cannon resting casually on his shoulder. "You have been a profound annoyance today, Hayes," Briggs called out over the rain. "Drop the weapons. The princess is coming with us." Isabel stepped back, pressing herself against the heavy tires of their stolen transport. "Briggs, my uncle sent you? Nothing personal, Your Highness." Briggs smiled, a cruel, cold expression. "It's just politics. The councillor believes your reign would be detrimental to human Illyrian trade relations." Now, Hayes, I know your reputation. I know about your little 10-foot rule. But you're outgunned, outmanned, and out of tricks. Briggs signaled with his hand, and two heavily armored guards began advancing toward them, weapons raised. Nobody gets close, Briggs, Declan yelled back, his voice cutting through the roar of the rain. That wasn't a suggestion. It's a guarantee. Declan didn't aim at the advancing guards. He aimed his heavy kinetic pistol directly at the volatile plasma manifolds of the automated fueling pump standing 10 feet to Briggs's left. He pulled the trigger 3 times. The tungsten slugs ruptured the pressurized containment casing. The resulting explosion was catastrophic. A massive shockwave of blue plasma erupted across the launch pad, instantly vaporizing the advancing guards and throwing Briggs and the remaining forces backward in a chaotic storm of fire and shrapnel. The shockwave knocked Declan and Isabel to the ground. Declan was up in an instant, grabbing Isabel by the arm and dragging her through the smoke and raining debris toward the open doors of the freight pod. "Get in!" Declan roared, throwing her into the metallic interior of the pod. He hit the emergency manual override on the exterior panel. The heavy steel doors began to slide shut. Through the narrowing gap, Declan saw Briggs, badly burned but still moving, raising his heavy cannon toward the pod. Declan raised his Colt, taking one final, perfectly measured breath. The human didn't miss. The round struck Briggs square in the visor, dropping the rogue commander into the ash and mud. The doors sealed shut with a heavy mechanical clunk, plunging them into the dim, red emergency lighting of the launch capsule. A second later, the magnetic rails engaged, and the pod shot upward into the stratosphere, leaving the treachery and the rain far below them. The crushing gravity of the ascent pinned Declan and Isabel to the grated floor of the freight pod. The acceleration was brutal, utterly devoid of the inertial dampeners standard on passenger vessels. The raw, unshielded thrust was designed for hauling heavy titanium or not fragile biological organisms. Declan gritted his teeth, his reinforced skeletal structure groaning under the immense pressure, focusing on regulating his breathing. Beside him, Isabel could not fight the overwhelming physical strain. Her violet eyes rolled back, and she slipped into unconsciousness. Minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. Finally, the relentless crushing sensation ceased, instantly replaced by the disorienting weightless drift of microgravity. The red emergency lights of the pod flickered, casting long, shifting shadows across the cramped metallic interior. Declan immediately engaged the magnetic clamps on his boots, securing himself to the deck. He moved quickly to Isabel's side, checking her pulse. It was rapid but steady. She was alive. "Wake up, Your Highness," Declan said, his voice echoing in the hollow chamber. He tapped her shoulder firmly. "We are in orbit, but we only have about 20 minutes of breathable air in this container before carbon dioxide toxicity sets in. We need to move." Isabel gasped, her eyes flying open as she clawed at her throat, disoriented by the zero-gravity environment. She grabbed Declan's extended hand, allowing him to pull her upright, anchoring her to the wall using a series of cargo straps. "Where are we?" she rasped, coughing as the dry, stale air of the pod burned her lungs. Declan moved to the manual access terminal near the sealed doors, pulling a heavy physical data cable from his tactical vest and jacking it directly into the console. He keyed in a sequence of overrides. A small, cracked monitor flickered to life, displaying a wireframe schematic of their immediate orbital vicinity. "We are approaching the Sector 12 automated orbital refinery," Declan explained, his icy blue eyes scanning the data scrolling across the screen. "It is an aging piece of infrastructure, built around a central processing hub stamped with the faded logo of Lockheed Martin. It is a relic from the early days of human corporate expansion in this system, mostly automated now. My plan was to dock with the raw materials intake, breach the airlock, and steal one of the automated long-haul freighters docked on the far side." "Was?" Isabel caught the past tense instantly, her aristocratic instincts sharpening despite the exhaustion. "Look at the sensor sweep," Declan pointed a heavily calloused finger at a massive red wedge shape dominating the digital map positioned directly between their incoming pod and the refinery. That is an Illyrian heavy cruiser. The Viper. It is running completely dark. Transponders off, weapon systems hot. Counselor Preston did not just send ground forces. He positioned a blockade in orbit to ensure absolutely nothing leaves this hemisphere. Isabel stared at the screen. The reality of her uncle's absolute betrayal settling over her. Her family, her legacy, her entire life had been dismantled in a matter of hours. The fear that had gripped her in the bunker began to recede, replaced by a cold, calculating anger that mirrored the frigid vacuum of space outside their thin metal walls. "They will intercept the pod," Isabel stated, her voice losing its previous tremor. "They already have a tractor beam locked onto us?" Declan confirmed, checking his sidearm one last time. He had 2 magazines left. Against a cruiser full of heavily armed Marines, it was a death sentence. "When they pull us into their hangar bay, they will vent this pod to space. They will not even bother opening the doors." "No," Isabel said softly. She unbuckled her cargo straps and pushed off the wall, floating gracefully toward the terminal. "Move aside, Corporal." Declan raised an eyebrow but stepped back, allowing the Illyrian princess access to the crude human interface. "You said this refinery uses old Lockheed Martin architecture," she asked, her fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with blistering speed. "Yes, it is outdated." "Why?" "Because my uncle is arrogant," Isabel replied, a dangerous, sharp smile forming on her lips. "He believes human technology is primitive. He relies entirely on Illyrian military encryption, ignoring the foundational code of the stations around him. Illyrian cruisers use automated proximity shielding designed to deflect energy weapons and hypervelocity missiles, but they do not register inert, unpowered, slow-moving mass. "What are you doing?" Declan asked, watching the monitor as she bypassed the refinery's automated safety protocols. "You taught me the value of kinetic force, Corporal," she said, locking eyes with him. "Sometimes you just need to hit something incredibly hard." Isabel slammed her hand onto the execution key. Thousands of miles away, the automated Lockheed Martin refinery hummed to life. The massive magnetic rails of the primary mass driver, typically used to launch process titanium ingots toward the inner planets, slowly rotated. Instead of targeting a designated transport lane, Isabel had fed it the exact coordinates of the Illyrian cruiser currently holding them in its tractor beam. 3 colossal titanium ingots, each weighing over 40 tons, were loaded into the firing chamber. "Brace yourself," Isabel ordered. The mass driver fired. Because the ingots possessed no energy signature, no guidance systems, and no chemical thrusters, the cruiser's advanced sensors simply categorized them as orbital debris. By the time the ship's optical cameras registered the threat, it was far too late. The 40-ton slugs struck the cruiser's portside engine block with devastating kinetic force. The impact shattered the heavy armor plating, tearing through the primary drive core, and crippling the vessel instantly. The tractor beam holding their pod flickered and died. Declan stared at the monitor as the crippled cruiser drifted helplessly out of their flight path. He looked at the princess, seeing her in an entirely new light. She was no longer a fragile VIP to be shielded. She was a survivor. "I have overridden the refinery's automated freighter," Isabel said, stepping back from the console. "It is detaching and coming to intercept our pod now. It has a hyperdrive and enough provisions to reach the core worlds." Declan gave a slow, respectful nod. "We are going to the core worlds, then?" "Yes," Isabel said, her violet eyes burning with resolve. "I am going to take my throne back, and anyone who gets in my way will have to deal with my guard." "I only have one rule, Your Highness," Declan said, a grim smile finally breaking across his rugged face as their pod clanked heavily against the docking ring of their new ship. "I know," Isabel replied. "Nobody gets close. The universe is full of elegant weapons and ancient alien politics. But sometimes survival comes down to human grit and the sheer refusal to yield. Declan Hayes and Princess Isabel prove that when humanity's brutal pragmatism meets alien intellect, the galaxy better watch out. If you love this deep dive into sci-fi HFY storytelling and want more epic tales of human resilience in the cosmos, smash that like button, share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans, and subscribe so you never miss an adventure.